Today in geography, we're going to take a look at the Geographical Dictionary. This is found on page RA36 and RA37 in your geography textbook. Now, the purpose of our study today is to understand the different types of geographic features. RA stands for the reference atlas, and you can see that a couple of the pages in this area of the book are going to give you different types of maps of locations. RA 36 and 37 specifically have a landmass and water feature dictionary here for us, in which it's going to show us what those features look like. As we're going to come across different descriptions of what land and geographic features are in different locations, we're going to need to understand what the shape of that land is in those places. So I want us to reference these examples so that we can visualize these places as we're reading about them for the rest of the year. I'm going to start on the left-hand side and read through. What I'd like you to do is, as you're following with each definition, try and find that description, try and find that term on the map itself. Some of them have very similar definitions and are going to be described in the same way, and some of them might not even show up on the map itself, but just by understanding the definition, we'll be able to better understand geographic features. To get started, an archipelago is a group of islands. If I take my little navigator here and I zoom in up to this top corner, you can see that these group of islands sticking out of the water here, that's called an archipelago. The second definition that I have is a basin. Area of land drained by a given river and its branches. Area of land surrounded by lands of higher elevation. So the basin itself is this middle portion. You can see how it's kind of shaped by the water and the river and the branches of that river coming down into that lower elevation. Third term that we have is a bay, B-A-Y, not B-A-E. Part of a large body of water that extends into the shoreline, generally smaller than a gulf. So a bay is kind of like this inland, or this water inlet area. It's smaller than a gulf. If it's a lot larger, we would say that it's a gulf. Kind of looks like this in shape. Next we have a canyon. Deep, narrow valley with steep walls. Right here in the middle, you have that canyon description. A cape is a point of land that extends into a river, lake, or ocean. So if that land sticks out, one of the ways you can describe that is a cape. A channel is a wide, straighter waterway between two land masses that lie close to each other. Deep part of a river or other waterway. Here's the channel. This is what a lot of times the shipping route is going to be, where boats are going to go back and forth here, where it's a lot deeper than when the water is closer to shore. A cliff is a steep rock face. That cliff has the steep, high wall of rock, earth, or ice. Continent's not shown on here, but you could maybe use this entire island as an example of a continent. Those 7 continents that make up our Earth include North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and the most south continent, Antarctica. Should be all 7 of those. Next we have a delta. If you look down in this right-hand corner, you can find a delta. Delta is created when this flat, low-lying land is built up from soil that has been carried downstream by a river, and it's deposited here. So if the river has higher elevation, that water moves a lot faster, but once it gets down to lower and level land, it kind of slows down. A lot of times it dumps out any of the dirt that it would have eroded during the course of its travels, and it actually starts to form little land masses down here with other small branches of this river. A divide is a stretch of high land that separates river systems. Downstream is the direction in which a river or stream flows. So if this is upstream up here, where the source of the river is, downstream is where it's moving in this direction. Upstream is against the current, downstream is probably with the current. An escarpment is a steep cliff or slope between a higher and lower land surface. You can see that right here. It's a lot really similar to what is called a cliff, but just another term for that item. In column 2, we have a glacier. Here's a depiction of what that glacier looks like. A large, thick body of slow-moving ice. Secondly, we have a gulf. In the top corner of this map here, you have the Gulf, which is described as part of a large body of water that extends into a shoreline, generally larger and more deeply indented than a bay. So it gives you the difference between those things, even though they can be somewhat similar. Down here in another similar description is the harbor, a sheltered place along a shoreline where ships can anchor safely. So you've got a gulf as this large area, bay is a little bit smaller, and then where those ships actually come into is the harbor. Next, you've got highlands that are depicted right up here, obviously showing that they have a higher elevation, such as a hill, mountain, or plateau. Over here on the map, you can see that there are hills that obviously describe also what would be considered a highland. Elevated land with sloping sides and rounded summit, generally smaller than a mountain that compares right here. An island is a land area that is completely surrounded by water. Right down here is a good example. An isthmus, the word isthmus, shown right up here, is this land area smaller than a continent, completely surrounded, narrow stretch of land connecting two large land areas. So you've got this larger area out at the end and this tiny little squeak of land in between these bodies of water. So wherever it gets really thin in terms of the amount of land between these two larger pieces of land is an isthmus. A lake is a sizable inland body of water. You know about lakes because you live right next to Lake Michigan, the Great Lakes, right here in the Midwest. Lowland area depicted right down here, obviously a lower level of elevation, usually level or at a low level comparable to sea level. A lot of times water is going to show up next to where that lowland is because of that level of elevation. A mesa is a broad flat-top landform with steep sides. It's a little bit smaller than a plateau. If you look over here, here's a plateau. A mesa is kind of times described as something that's smaller but similar because it has that flat top to it. And lastly, which we already talked about, the comparison of a mountain land with steep sides that rise sharply 1,000 feet or more from surrounding land, generally larger or more rugged than a hill. In column 3, we have a mountain peak, the pointed top of a mountain. So here's the peak, the summit that people are always trying to climb up to, especially if it's a nice, big, huge, challenging mountain they want to get to the top. Next, you have a mountain range. If you look way over here to the right-hand side, a mountain range is a series of connected mountains that are going together. A lot of times you're going to find mountains in the form of a mountain range just because of how that geographic feature formed. Mouth of a river is a place where a stream or river flows. Here's an example of a mouth of a river that is opening up to what would be the larger body of water. An oasis. Here's an example of a desert up at the top. An oasis is this small little area where there's actually some water, and vegetation is usually found there because it can grow because of that water. In the other barren parts of the desert, the arid parts of the desert, it's real dry. That oasis is what you're looking for because it has that water. That vegetation is a dead giveaway to that. After oasis, if you look way over here on the left-hand side, you've got an example of an ocean, this big, huge, massive body of water. Technically, the entire Earth is made up of one ocean, but we label them based on where they're located. You've got the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Arctic Ocean to the northern part of our globe, and the Southern Ocean towards Antarctica in the south. After that, you've got the description of an ocean current, the stream of either cold or warm water that moves in a definite direction through an ocean. Below that, a peninsula. Here's your example of a peninsula right down here. Body of land jutting into a lake or ocean surrounded by three sides of water. So 1, 2, 3 sides of water. Physical feature is any characteristic of a place occurring naturally, such as a landform, body of water, climate pattern, or resource. So as we're talking about the physical features, we're talking about what the shape of the land looks like, and then some of the other ways in which that land interacts, especially with the water, climate, and then some of the resources that are naturally available in those places. Example of a plain is right down here. It's a lot like a lowland area. Plain is an area of level land, usually at low elevation, often covered with types of grasses. A plateau, if you look over here, again, we talked about a mesa before. A plateau is this area of flat land, rolling land at a high elevation, about 3,000 to 3,000 feet. So it's up there in terms of what the elevation is, but it's relatively flat on top. The reef is a chain of rocks. You can see right out here where you've got some of the structure that's growing. A lot of times that's considered a coral reef, where those living organisms are growing, and all sorts of different fish and aquatic life live amongst those ecosystems. Section 4 on the right-hand side, you've got right here the depiction of what a river looks like, large natural stream of water that runs through land. Sea is a large body of water completely or partly surrounded by land. A sea coast, you can see right down here where that water and land meet, land lying next to sea or an ocean. A sound, not one that is often recognized, is a broad inland body of water, often between a coastline and one or more islands off the coast. So here's a sound. It's kind of like that bay, but it has more of a narrow shape that goes inside of what would be a larger body of landmass and then a smaller piece of landmass. The source of a river is the place where that water is going to start to collect, where that river begins, often in highland areas. If it snows in the mountains and that snow collects up here for the wintertime, in the spring when that starts to melt, it creates that river source. Or if there's any way in which the water table underneath the Earth's surface, there's water actually underneath the Earth that comes up and can also be considered the source of the river. We have a strait, which is depicted right here on this right-hand side. It's this narrow stretch of water joining two larger bodies of water. A tributary, if you look in this river here, you have an example of these other rivers that are connecting these branches. Where they contribute to a large river, they're considered a tributary. So the biggest river is usually given credit as being the boss, and these smaller rivers contribute, as in when they get added to it, the river actually gets larger or bigger and carries more water. Upstream, again, is going in the direction of the current. Downstream is going with the current. A valley is shown right here, where it's going to have this lowland, usually between hills or mountains, so higher elevation down into the valley. And the last one on our list is a volcano, pretty easily identified by the eruption that's taken place. One that wasn't listed in your definitions was a reservoir. This is a lake, but a lot of times it's considered man-made because somebody might build a dam in a river and it fills up that water in that area. That should hopefully give you a brief overview of all the different types of geographic features we're going to talk about. You can always come back and reference the Geographic Dictionary if you ever need to understand what it is that we're talking about in a specific place in the world. Your assignment for today's geography class is to complete this What Do You Know worksheet. This is going to begin what is our study in Chapter 1, the Geographer's World. I want you to read through the directions, read each statement if you believe the statement is true, select A for agree. If you believe the statement is false, select D for agree. Mr. Shane is simply trying to gauge what is your understanding of geography and these geographic terms that we just covered, and how we can better understand those as we go throughout this lesson and all of our lessons in the future. Again, fill this out. You're going to circle one or the other. Make sure that your name